So this video has been requested by my amazing Year 10 class, 10D. Hello to you all, hope you're all having a nice half term. So yeah, it's on the Treaty of Versailles. As I said, it's been requested by that amazing class. You guys, 10D, have been working really hard this year. I'm really pleased with you. So you've earned a bit of a break this half term, but obviously a few of you requested this video on the Treaty of Versailles. So if any of you are struggling with that, struggling with the understanding of what the Treaty of Versailles was and what was involved and the effect it had on Germany, then hopefully this video will give you a little bit of help on that. First of all, a few of you asked for some shout outs, so this is new. So a big shout out to Dan, Ben H, Tori, Charlotte, Jack, James, Jenny, Alfie, Georgina, Jake, Felix, Nathan, Rasheen and Ollie. Shout outs to all of you. So, the Treaty of Versailles, what is it? It's a little bit more complicated than that, Jake and co. The Treaty of Versailles is a peace treaty signed by Germany in June 1919, and it punished Germany severely for the First World War, for their actions in the First World War. The first thing that you really need to know about the Treaty of Versailles is who was involved. Well, obviously Germany are involved because they sign it, but who makes them sign this? Well, the people who made Germany sign this were, well, the victors of the First World War. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was signed at Versailles, the Palace of Versailles in France, in Paris, and it was a result of the Paris Peace Conference. So at the end of the war, end of First World War, all of the nations that had been involved in the First World War met at the Paris Peace Conference, and each individual nation, on the losing side anyway, had to sign these peace treaties. The Treaty of Versailles is the one that Germany has to sign. There are others that you don't need to know about. The only one you need to know about is the Treaty of Versailles involving Germany. But this Paris Peace Conference, as I mentioned before, was dominated by the Big Three. Okay, a group of countries, or three countries, that became known as, or nicknamed, the Big Three. Now, the Big Three were Britain, France and the USA, and it's largely down to these countries that Germany ended up being punished so severely and so harshly. Now, the USA had actually been quite keen to keep Germany reasonably stable. They didn't really want Germany to be completely ruined, as France and Britain wanted to, and I'll talk about them in a minute. America wanted Germany to be able to recover. So punish them slightly, but leave them able to recover. It was France in particular who wanted the opposite. They wanted to see Germany severely weakened. They really wanted to see them in dire straits, really. And you can kind of understand where they're coming from. Remember, France has been invaded by Germany at the start of the war as part of the Schlieffen Plan. So Germany have invaded France and attacked France, and as well as this, the Western Front, or the big line of trenches, much of that has been in France, and naturally a lot of France itself has been damaged and destroyed as a part of the war. So France are really quite bitter about this, as you can understand. So they want Germany to be pretty much ruined, or certainly left in a state that means that they can't do this again. They can't invade France again. Remember, it's this isn't the first time that France and Germany have fought each other. We've had the Franco-Prussian War before that France have been quite bitter about, because Germany had won that one. Then you've had the First World War, where Germany have invaded France again. So there's real bitterness and resentment on the French side against Germany. They want to see Germany punished severely. Britain, less so than France. Not quite as severely as France do they want to see Germany punished, but they still want to see Germany again, quite severely punished. They don't want to get into another war with Germany. In fact, public opinion in Britain really does want to see Germany punished. The government in 1918 had been re-elected partly on the campaign promise that they were going to squeeze Germany until the pip squeaked, meaning we're going to squeeze everything we can out of Germany. We're really going to give them a hard time here. And there are many people in Britain who want to see the Kaiser hung. They really want to see Germany punished. So it's France and Britain really who are really pushing for Germany to be punished. America not so much, but it's the actions of the big three, largely Britain and France, that leads to Germany being punished so severely and having such harsh terms to agree to. So what were the terms of the treaty? Well, I'm only going to talk to you about the key ones. There are loads of terms of the Treaty of Versailles that Germany had to sign and agree to. There are 5 really that you really need to know about. Okay, the first of them that I'm going to talk about is that Germany lost land. Okay, Germany lost a huge amount of land, both in Germany, or what had been Germany. They had to give up a lot of the land that they owned, and also land colonies, land around the world that they owned as well. So they had to give up Alsace-Lorraine to France. Remember, that had been a bit of a sticking point between France and Germany. Germany had taken Alsace-Lorraine off France at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, and now France wanted it back, and they got it back as part of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany also had to give up land to Belgium, so they gave up Eupen and Malmedy to Belgium. They also gave quite a big chunk of land to Poland. Posen and West Prussia were given to Poland, and that led to, you may remember this from the other day, I put a map up on the board in lesson of what Germany looked like after the Treaty of Versailles, and it leads to the creation of what became known as the Polish Corridor. Now, there is a map in your textbook, can't remember what page it's on, but if you look fairly early on in the textbook, you'll see a map of what Germany looked like after, or what Europe looked like after the Treaty of Versailles. Germany, there's basically a corridor running through Germany now on the east side that now belongs to Poland. So Germany's basically been split up into 2 parts. So you can imagine how scary this was for the Germans who now lived in this part of Poland. It was really, really quite shocking to them. As well as the fact that they'd obviously lost, and also, sorry, I should have said before, they lost all 11 of their colonies. So Germany had owned colonies in Africa and the Far East. All of those were gone. They were given to Britain and France to make their empires bigger. And obviously Germany now didn't have an empire. They were also forbidden from joining with Austria. Germany and Austria, obviously very similar cultures, same language. They wanted to join together and make themselves more powerful. That was forbidden. Germany and Austria were not allowed to join together. But as well as all that, as well as the land that they'd lost and the people that they'd lost, these areas of land that they'd lost were really, really important to Germany, not just because they were part of the country and full of people who identified as German. They were also home to, or maintained, 50% of Germany's iron reserves and 15% of its coal reserves. So suddenly Germany's lost 50% of its iron and 15% of its coal. Now naturally that's going to have a massive impact on 2 things. German industry, obviously iron and coal, very important for industry, factories and making things. But also coal in particular, people need coal to, at this time anyway, they needed coal to heat their homes. And that is naturally going to have a massive effect on the German people because there's much less coal now for the German population. So that has a huge impact. One other area of land that still belonged to Germany, but there were some key terms attached to it as part of the Treaty of Versailles, was the Rhineland. Again, if you look at that map in your textbook, you'll see this. The Rhineland was an area of Germany that was on the border between Germany and France. Or on the French border, I should say. Now, Germany were allowed to keep the Rhineland. It remained part of Germany. However, it was demilitarised. Now, what that means is Germany were no longer allowed to keep any kind of military in that area. So they couldn't have any soldiers there or any tanks. Well, they didn't have any tanks anyway, which I'll come to in a minute. But they weren't allowed to keep any soldiers there or any kind of military stuff in the Rhineland. Obviously it's on the French border and the French have been really worried about the Germans invading again. So they've said, look, you can keep the Rhineland, but if we see a soldier in there or see any kind of military movement in there, then that gives us, or France in particular, permission to attack. So that was another term or clause of the Treaty of Versailles. Another one, just get the paper, that Germany had to agree to was the War Guilt Clause. Does what it says on the tin, really. Germany had to take all of the blame or all of the guilt for starting the war and all of the damage caused. So Germany take full responsibility and full blame for starting the war in the first place, which is a bit of a contentious issue given that what we know about the First World War and how it started, and all of the damage. So obviously, naturally, the people in Germany are thinking, well, hang on, we're one country who were involved in the war, but so were Britain, so were France, so were Russia, so were America, and etc. etc. How can all the damage done in the war be our fault? So again, that's another term that really causes quite a lot of anger and resentment in Germany, because Germany have had to accept responsibility for all of the damage and for starting the war. I've mentioned this already a little bit. German military forces were cut. I said before about the Rhineland and how they weren't allowed any tanks in there. Well, they didn't have any tanks because as part of this clause, as part of the military cuts, Germany were no longer allowed to have any air force, couldn't have any tanks, couldn't have any submarines, and their army, the manpower of the army, was cut down to 100,000 men, which sounds like a lot, but it is not. Yeah, it's a really, really small amount of men for an army. It's essentially enough men or soldiers to kind of keep the peace in the country, but forget about starting a war with anyone. 100,000 men is nothing. Okay, you think about the figures from the First World War and some of the battles that we've looked at, and how many men died in those battles. 100,000 men is nothing by First World War standards and beyond. So the fact that Germany had their army cut down to 100,000 men really, really weakens them. Also, their navy, as I said before, they're not allowed any submarines. They're only allowed 6 battleships. So Germany is massively weakened by the Treaty of Versailles. No air force, no tanks, no submarines, only 6 battleships, and only 100,000 men in the army. They are militarily crippled, really, by the Treaty of Versailles. Another term that they had to agree to was reparations. Okay, money, just to remind you there, reparations. It's essentially compensation for the war. As I said before, they've already had to accept all the responsibility for starting the war and all the damage. They now have to basically pay the bill for it. And they were charged or made to pay 136 billion marks, which in British pound sterling equated to about £6.5 billion. So a huge amount of money. So they're having to pay for all of the damage as part of the war. They have to pay all the compensation to Britain and France and Russia and whoever else to pay for the damage of the war. Now this really, again, this cripples their economy. We'll look at this after half term in a lot more detail and the effect it has on Germany, but it ruins their economy. Really does a huge amount of damage to the German economy. So that's another term of the treaty that does them a huge amount of damage, and another term of the treaty that the German people and the German government are really, really not happy with. And finally, the last key term that I'm going to talk about is Germany was not allowed to join the League of Nations. Okay, just to remind you, I think I've very briefly mentioned this in lesson. The League of Nations is a new international organisation, a little bit like the United Nations that we have today. International organisation made up of lots of different countries. Their main aim is essentially to stop wars happening. So if there's an international issue, they'll discuss it and try and find an alternative to fighting each other in a war. But Germany were not allowed to join this, which naturally made Germany, which has been a huge power in the world, as we've seen kind of in the build-up to World War One, they've been a huge power. It makes them very humiliated because they've been left out of this international organisation that Britain's a member of and France is a member of. Interestingly, America chose not to join. Interesting that. But Germany, being excluded from this international organisation, so they feel excluded, they feel humiliated, and left out of the international club, if you will. And as I say, it really, really embarrasses this nation that's been a very proud nation and a very powerful nation up to and including World War One. Now, briefly mentioned this already, but how did the Germans react to the Treaty of Versailles? I've mentioned here and there how they feel, how German people feel. Well, at first, the German government actually refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles. They said, this is ridiculous, it's humiliating, it's unfair, we refuse to sign it. But then very quickly it became apparent that they had to sign it, because the alternative was the Allies would just restart the war. And, the reason why Germany have surrendered in the first place is because they can't win. They're going to lose. So the German government go, well, we've got to sign it because the alternative is starting the war again, which we'll lose again, and we'll just have to sign this treaty anyway, or maybe even one that's even harsher if we start the war again. So they had no choice, and the German government had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. And the representatives who went to sign the treaty ended up calling the treaty, or nicknaming the treaty, a shameful diktat. Yeah? We have been forced to accept an unfair and humiliating treaty. They really, really were, well, upset with it. They call it this shameful diktat, this thing that we've been forced to sign. It's shameful, it's unfair, it's humiliating. And naturally, as I've mentioned already briefly, the German people really resent this. They really hate the Treaty of Versailles. They see it for what it is, a really humiliating and unfair treaty. Now, rather unfairly, the German government end up getting a lot of the blame for this. Okay, the German people, who don't really understand the full implications of not signing the treaty. Most German people go, why have the government signed this? They've betrayed us. They are the November criminals. Remember, Germany have surrendered, or the war's ended in November 1918. They see the government, the new government, as November criminals, a government who have stabbed them in the back, or have been responsible for signing this treaty that's going to do a huge amount of damage to Germany. So it causes a huge amount of pain and upset and resentment and anger in Germany, to the point where the new government are immediately, or almost immediately, really unpopular. Many people in Germany just totally reject the new Weimar government. They try and undermine it. Some of the representatives of Germany at the Treaty of Versailles are even assassinated as a result of the anger that the German people feel towards the Treaty of Versailles. Now, it has a huge long-term impact on the state of Germany that we are going to go into in a lot of detail after half-term. In fact, we briefly looked at some of the impacts that this had on the government in our last lesson when we talked about the Spartacist uprising, but we'll look at this in way more detail after half-term. But hopefully that video has cleared up a few issues for anyone who was struggling with the Treaty of Versailles, like what it was and the impact it had on Germany. As I say, we'll look at it in way more detail after half-term, but I hope that's cleared up a few issues for those people who had any. I hope you all have a really, really nice half-term, and I will see you in about a week's time. So take care, enjoy your half-term, and see you soon.